Hi everyone, I'm Kelly O'Horo, and this is Adaptable Behavior Explained.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I really appreciate your time, and I'm especially excited for this episode of Counselor Cafe. I have a friend and colleague with me today, Barry Litt, and he's going to talk about relationships and attachment and all sorts of other cool things that are really relevant to all of you. And so I'm just excited to have him here. He's out of New Hampshire, and we're really lucky to have him here on our show today. So Barry, please introduce yourself, and thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks, Kelly, for having me. It's a real treat. It's a real treat to be with you. So I'm trained as a marriage and family therapist. I've been in the field for about 40 years now, half of which is with doing EMDR, and now I'm an EMDR consultant. And my early training in object relations and family systems has been a very, very helpful marriage with the adaptive information processing model of EMDR. And I've been able to integrate
Can I
those.
chime in for just a quick second there? For those of you who haven't watched earlier episodes, adaptive information processing is really just the theory by which we all grow and develop. We are learning creatures and mammals. And so everything we ever did, we learned, whether it was epigenetically or now in our environments. And so that's what Barry's an expert in. And I'm excited to hear how he marries these topics together.
Okay. Well, thanks for that clarification, right? That's sort of the driving engine of EMDR is what makes people process through emotional traumas. We say from the bottom up, emotionally and somatically. So I've been able to take my learning and evolution over the years into 3 different chapters and 3 different books and workshops and trainings all throughout the U.S. and Canada. And that's what I'll be doing in San Diego in May. And so that's, an exciting next venture for me.
And for those therapists watching, if you haven't seen Barry present, it's not to be missed. He's dynamic and so charismatic and really relatable. And so it's so fun. So thank you so much for that. And I'm excited to dive right in. So I'm going to give a little background on why this topic is so important for all people, not just therapists. We are just hardwired to be reactive to our environments, and it's how we're wired and built. And so everything in our environment stimulates memory. And sometimes that memory recalled is good and doesn't have any problematic behavior associated with it. And sometimes the memory is maladaptively encoded. In other words, we end up triggered as if something that we're seeing, tasting, feeling, touching, smelling today, it reminds us of something that happened in the past that was negatively stored. And so those are called triggers or reminders in our nervous system. And I want to make sure we talk about that because I want my next question for Barry to have a little bit of a preamble so that those who don't know what that is, you have that background. So Barry, knowing that we all as humans get triggered, knowing that we don't want to and we judge our reactions, and oftentimes those triggers really interrupt or create problems in our relationships because we are getting our stuff on others when it's not necessarily their problem to deal with. So in all your years of experience, both clinically and in consultation, how do you understand why people react poorly to stimulus or why they get triggered from a zoomed out place?
Right. Great question. So to be sure, you mentioned the role of memory, and the role of memory in humans is to predict. It's so we know where the next watering hole is. It's so we know where the lion's den is. It's to anticipate problems. After all, we did evolve in a predator-prey environment. So safety is, of chief importance, certainly in the way we evolved, even though in the modern society, it may take a backseat to other concerns, but that's not what our nervous system thinks. Our nervous system is always kind of on the lookout. And so while trauma can affect different people differently, and we can't really predict who's going to be traumatized by what, and that's because it's a subjective reaction to an event as opposed to the event itself. But we do know is that the way people react can be sort of clustered or understood is generally speaking, for the most part, going to land in one or more of 3 domains of self-experience or domains of self-experience. This is threats to the continuity of my sense of self in the world. And I can mention what those three are and then kind of circle back and say a little bit about
Yeah, please do. And when you say domains of self or identity, can you give an example of what that would look like? Or will you do that when you explain those three domains?
I will, yes.
Okay.
So something bad happens, it's going to hit me in one or more of these three domains. They include attachment, merit, and safety. So the attachment domain, this is typically trauma within the first 3 years of life. Research shows that about 40% of individuals have an insecure attachment style. That means that there was some more or less fracture of their attachment relationship with a primary caregiver. So that's going to be a persistent feature of their sense of not only self, but self in relation to other. The next domain is what I call the merit domain. This is concerns with self-worth, self-esteem, and so forth. So while in the first group, it affects, roughly 40% of the population, nobody gets through the merit domain unscathed. We are wired to doubt ourselves and to compare ourselves to others often. So the merit domain really involves everybody. And that's about feeling not good enough or a failure or not this enough or not that enough. And then finally, the safety domain. This is the sense of the world as generally a safe place gets fractured by some event that, at least I perceive as a threat to my safety or vitality, a life-threatening event. And so this is for those who have, experienced life-threatening events, combat trauma, motor vehicle accidents, or things that created that fight, flight, or freeze response that says, I'm going to die. So anything that occurs is going to land in one or more of those three domains.
Right. And I think that for our viewers, nobody questions those safety domain oriented injuries. People don't argue about, combat threat or car accidents or explosions or tsunamis. And nobody judges the reactivity in a human when there's a safety violation of self, and that looks and tastes or reacts in the world in a way that isn't suitable for the now. If there's a soldier back from combat and he drops to the floor when he hears a balloon pop at a party, people might go, oh, but they don't judge him because it makes sense that that's how he learned to survive. And that one becomes so very obvious.
Right.
Where I think I want to really zoom in a little bit more. And I know that both merit and attachment systems are incredibly important and will impact relationships. I think that the topic that doesn't seem to get on people's radars in an obvious way are those 0 to 3 memories that really grossly affect the attachment system. And I think part of that is because we don't have a lot of explicit memory tied to those things. And we're not taught to associate those experiences as children that, well, you know what, if my dad works out of town 6 of 7 days a week, I'm not going to feel like I'm safe in the world related to his connection and love for me. And it must be something wrong with me that he leaves me all the time. And people don't understand how that so greatly impacts how we believe in ourselves in relationship.
Yeah, that's very true. That's a really good point. Yeah, in point of fact, for the most part, we don't form explicit memories in the first 3 years. So all the remembering is not conscious remembering, it's implicit remembering.
And say more about that. Implicit. Yeah.
So implicit memory is the stuff you learn you don't realize you're learning. Like, how do you put your pants on? Like nobody taught you that. It wasn't the way you learned, like the capital of Brazil. It was something you experienced and encoded without even knowing it was going on. How do you open a doorknob? These are things that we do all the time implicitly, that is without conscious thought. And how we relate, what we expect of caregivers, what we expect in terms of, how safe I'm going to be with a caregiver. Will I be understood, seen, comforted by a caregiver? There's no language for this in the first few years. These are, pre-verbal years for the most part, but it's experienced. And that experience is encoded. And so my system, my attachment system, is striving to figure a hand in glove fit with my primary caregiver.
Right.
This system will persist. Go ahead.
Right. Oh, no, I was just going to say, and I think that what people don't understand is how incredibly important those first 3 years are for the individual to develop in a sense of I'm worthy, I matter, I'm lovable, I belong. All of those end up so deeply learned.
That's right.
Without learning, without
right.
someone teaching us. And so we decide who we are in relationship to our value for others. And when that's done poorly, there's so much shame associated with that presenting issue. And when we have a lot of shame that we have to overcome, oftentimes I think of that as a little bit of a red flag for me as a therapist. Like, there's probably some really early developmental attachment wounding we have to look at when shame is just at the forefront of presenting issues. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. Now, shame can certainly be associated with trauma in the merit domain. I'm not good enough. I'm a failure, and I feel embarrassed or shamed. But to be sure, shame and fear are sort of the companion emotions of attachment trauma. And sometimes it can be, quite, self-evident, like, oh, I can't stand to be alone. If I'm alone, then I'm fearful and I'm not comfortable, and yet my friends and neighbors have no problem. But a lot of times it's not quite so clear. It could be that I'm fine when I'm by myself. It could be that when I have a partner who doesn't pay attention to me or ignores me or gives me, the stone face, that might be very triggering. So for some folks, because
I don't know where I stand. I don't know where I stand with them. If their face doesn't give me some information that says, I see you, I feel you, you matter. And they have, they lost their car keys. And so they have a scowl, and the person thinks, what's wrong? What did I do? Why?
Exactly. Yeah. So, we're always reading each other. And again, implicitly, unconsciously, some of that becomes conscious, like, oh, I noticed that you have a scowl. But unconsciously, my mirror neurons, my monkey see, monkey do neurons are looking to you as a mirror. And it's as if, we're playing mirror, mirror on the wall all the time. And I look in the mirror and I don't see a reflection coming back. And that's a freaky outy thing.
Right.
And now I'm going to make some attributions. You don't love me anymore. You don't want me anymore. I've done something horrible. I'm alone. I'm abandoned. And now I'm back to this horrible place that I would have experienced probably countless times as an infant, as a toddler.
Right. And of course, not in memory, but in somatic memory. This is so familiar, right. And I don't understand why.
Right. I don't understand why. Now, there's an attribution process that takes place. I'm going to feel very bad. But it happened when you gave me that stonewalling, nothing face.
Therefore, so your face is the problem.
You're the problem.
You're the problem. Your face is the problem. That expression you gave me, it's the responsibility of why I feel the way I feel.
Bingo. Yes. So, in one of the virtues of the model of understanding that these are triggers that people carry is if I'm activated like that, my natural inclination is to point the finger, and attribute it to something you're doing or not doing. There's this old adage, if I point the finger at you, I got 3 pointing back at me.
Right.
And that's useful in terms of stepping back and saying, okay, what am I going through? I'm really activated. What does that mean? I'm really emotional. I'm fearful. I feel shame. I mean, I want to say it's your fault, but, knowing myself, I'm alone. I don't matter. I'm not enough. This is a me thing. This is my attachment trauma.
Right.
It's not a character flaw. It's just a part of my early wiring.
Exactly. And getting some knowledge about our own histories really can help us start to connect those dots. So how do you understand the critical components of the attachment relationship in the therapeutic setting, as far as healing our wounds as people come in and see us?
Right. Good question. So when people see a therapist, it's a vulnerable relationship. It's an intimate relationship. And so people are going to transfer that attachment style onto the therapist. That's what we call the word transference. And for that matter, the therapist is a human too. And the therapist is going to transfer, my own attachment style into that relationship. And we call that counter transfer. It's the same phenomena. We add counter and we're talking about the therapist, but it's the same thing. So the attuned therapist, and therapists, the old adage, know thyself, very important. I can use my reactions to the client. I can study my client's ability to be open or to be candid, or they're variously guarded, as tools to understand what their attachment system is doing, how it's playing out in the therapy. And the reporting from the client, in addition to my observation, can help me understand how this attachment is playing out in their actual lives.
Right. And what happens in our office is likely what's happening outside of our office.
Yes.
So it's great data.
Although, yes, in a much more minimized form, generally speaking, because people are on their best behavior, right? And the therapist, is a secure attachment figure. We're trained and disciplined to be non-reactive. The whole structure of therapy is that I don't rely on my clients to, parent the child or earn income or, share tasks. So by design, the therapeutic relationship is kind of this very distilled petri dish to see this play out in a safe way that allows, for intervention.
Right. And talk a little bit about how the attachment relationships that people experience, and of course their wounds related to those three domains, show up in the office, and how we have to navigate that space.
Right. Well, to be sure, there are different styles of attachment, and I recommend anybody who's not familiar or wants to brush up on to look at your video, Kelly, on attachment styles. It's
Thank you.
Very nice. It's very clear. It's very well done, and it delineates what these styles are and can give us insights into how they might play out. The attachment of individual, their style, is a persistent feature. It tends to go throughout the lifespan, and it will modify according to development, but the fundamental of it will persist. So it'll show up in the therapy relationship. It'll show up in intimate partners or at work or anybody who's in that more or less close area.
Yeah, and that attachment relationship that was developed when we were young, that, of course, like you said, it shows up everywhere all the time and without our knowing typically about how we show up in the world. And it affects the way that we are in relationship everywhere we are. Or everywhere we go.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. Now, these attachment styles that, again, you did a very lovely job of describing, need to be understood as a scalar phenomena, as opposed to, I either have this or I don't have this. It's like, to what extent do I have this style? More or less. And the more there's attachment trauma, the more it will be felt by intimate others, including the therapist. So a client presentation, for example, when the presenting problems are things about like, I don't feel like I belong. I don't feel like I matter. People, who are close to me don't really know me or care about me. They don't include me. I feel alone. These are indicators. In the EMDR speak, we talk about negative cognitions, core beliefs that are persistent. These are going to show up sooner or later on the client presentation. But the therapist also may come to consultation and say, I'm not sure what to do with my client. I don't feel like I'm providing the right service. I don't feel like I'm doing enough. I feel like I don't have what it takes. I get nervous when they enter because I feel like whatever it is, they're too much for me. Well, those are the complementary attitudes. So you see, what I'm doing is I'm reverberating with that same sentiment, almost as if telepathically, I'm feeling their attachment system. So I'm actually getting data about their early life, even if we're talking about, their time at work. So the therapist can utilize this, and it's hard and it's challenging, but with consultation, it can be very helpful to utilize this to feed it back in a corrective way in the therapy.
Right. And we're creating new memory moment by moment in the therapeutic setting that can help reestablish. I can show up a certain kind of way if I'm a client, and the therapist can then mirror back a more appropriate stance based on that experience and create new pathways and help make known make what was implicit explicit in that experience, so that they have awareness of those past present connections, because we bring to light what's happening in that. And of course, what's happening in their relationships, which you know better than I do. That's what brings people into therapy most of the time is, you know, my partner, my husband, my child, my whatever, and I ... and they ...
Right.
You know,
That's right. And that partner, child, you know, husband, spouse, whatever, may in fact do ... Right. But the real issue is, how does it affect me? And am I being triggered? And so my triggers are my problem to solve. Right. This is a good news, bad news situation for people, for clients. The bad news is that these attachment styles are very persistent. That is the nature of being human, to attribute it to outside sources. It's what the other person did. It's what the situation is. It's the world is coming apart. That's why I feel this way. And so there's often a tug of war with partners or with the therapist about, well, no, it's not I'm doing something wrong. It's my partner. It's not I'm reacting. Anybody would feel this way. So there has to be sort of a battle about attribution. To what do I attribute this? I'm not going to change how the world is or is not coming apart.
We don't have any control over that.
No. But the good news part is that I can come into mastery over what my nervous system is doing with these things. And that's where bottom-up therapy like EMDR really comes into play. My reactions are from the emotional brain. I'm not going to talk myself out of these things. I can try, but I'll probably just wind up beating myself up because I'm using the wrong tool, you know, for the wrong problem. The intellectual part of my brain is really not the driver. It's the emotional part and the somatic part. So so-called bottom-up therapy is about transforming what my nervous system is doing with these various triggers so that now I can rise above my reactivity and then find a skillful, compassionate way of dealing with these things.
Right. That better matches today's circumstances and slows my system down enough so that I have time for choice, because that reactivity is just, it's without choice because it's so somatically informed and it's too fast. And that's because by design, the brain's designed to go that fast on purpose to keep us safe, alive, and well. And so when it's an obsolete reaction, that slowing down helps us have a response, which is so much better serving for our relationships in the now. And of course can better match our circumstances of the now. So we reduce that encoding. So what are the known implications for you? What are the implications of this known quantity when it comes to how do we as humans need to take account for knowing this?
Right. So I mentioned the challenge of attributional process, that I have a natural tendency to want to say it's someone else's fault. The adaptation of this attachment style may have had a very important role when I was, a youngster, but as a grown-up, I'm going to have a tendency to continue to play this out, even if it's obsolete.
Can you give an example of something we might have done as a child that was serving and necessary, but then when we do it in our partner relationships, how it's problematic?
Oh, sure. Well, that's a great question. And again, I'll just reference, your own video on attachment styles. So the dismissive avoidant attachment style of adulthood comes from an early childhood where caregivers are unreliable, unsafe, or unsoothing. And there could be 1,000 reasons for that. It could be anything from the primary caregiver, usually the mom, was sick, was anxious, was depressed, was being beaten up, that she's ill, that she's absent. I mean, the list really goes on. It doesn't have to be a bad guy. But it means as an early toddler infant, when I seek safety and the caregiver is not the thing that provides safety, I may turn inward. I may turn to toys. I may turn into rituals. I may play by myself. And so very early on, I take my attachments just aimed like beaming outward. And instead I curtail it and I beam it inward to take care of myself. Children who are doing this are often dissociative. They actually have anesthesia going on. They don't feel so much distress. So they could look fairly content. But their distress is out of awareness, dissociated. Well, that's suitable for that early childhood environment, but, try to run an intimate adult relationship that way. So when my partner makes a bid for attention, affection, attunement, it does not compute. And I might shut down. I might have that anesthesia happen again, that dissociation. I might turn away. The stonewalling I referenced earlier. If my partner's upset with me and my partner is engaging in conflict, which is often just a bid for more engagement, I may shut down and dissociate and blank out.
I don't know what to do with that. It's so unfamiliar.
That's right.
Because I couldn't get the attention of my caregivers when I was young. And so I don't know what to do with this now.
Exactly.
And it might overwhelm me.
But that won't be my attribution, however. My attribution will be, oh, well, my partner's too needy. My partner's too demanding. My partner just wants to fight. I don't like fighting. I'm a peaceful person. I don't see the need for all this emotionality. So, often people will invent a story.
We're wired for story. We figure it out and we want to say, here's what's happening and this is why.
Exactly.
This is why I feel this way.
Right. So, that couple may wind up very likely triggering each other's injuries. So, I'm triggered in that, in the attachment domain of self because my partner is demanding relational engagement that is overwhelming to me. And my shutting down may trigger my partner's attachment insecurity, you see, and then we're often running.
Right.
And so what so often happens, that's right. And so what often happens is each of us sees the problem as the other one. And we attribute the solution as, belonging to the partner or belonging to, if my father only told me he was proud of me, that would be like a merit domain type of thing. Right. Then I would feel good about myself. If my children excelled in school, then I would feel successful. That's a merit domain thing. Mm-hmm. If my partner, engaged with me more intimately, then I wouldn't feel so alone. That's an attachment thing. So we tend to get into this battle of, well, you need to change so I feel better. And my partner counters, well, no, you need to change so I feel better. Yes, but I feel worse than you do because you did this terrible thing.
Right.
Well, no, I feel worse than you. You owe it to me because last week you did two terrible things.
Right.
Yes, but I had a bad childhood. Yeah. Well, you had a bad childhood. I had no childhood. I was raised by wolves. I got fed by, raccoons taught me how to open trash cans. That's the kind of childhood. You owe it to me.
Right.
And so what I call a race to the bottom, exactly. that suffering is associated with entitlement. And if I suffer more, I'm entitled to have caregiving. Right. And so partners collide in terms of who's entitled to be caring for whom.
Right.
See, each of us want to be me.
And in service of the discharge of our own pain and discomfort, we fall into the blame game.
That's it.
And the projection game.
That's right.
And it's easier than feeling my responsibility to clean up my reactivity on my side of the street.
Absolutely.
And also, I don't think, I don't believe that people know they're doing it for the most part. No. I think people are not doing this by choice. I think they're doing this because they've not known any other way. And they don't understand how to attribute their emotional experience to something that isn't happening right now. They just don't know. Right. We should learn this when we're young. And of course, that's not what happens for us. So, I think the bullet point here is we have to clean up our side of the street in relationships, and we can control our reactivity, and we can become masters of our own nervous system with putting in the work for sure.
Yes. Well said. Right. Very well said.
So when thinking about the healing journey, what do you think is the primary pitfall that you see, whether coming from the client perspective or the therapist's perspective?
Yeah. So I'll circle back to the attributional process. So often, for example, when couples in particular, but individuals as well, come to therapy, often they're looking for a relational solution to an intrapsychic or psychological problem. If my partner would do more of this and less of that, I would feel safe. I would feel secure. I would feel like I'm good enough. If I just had somebody the other week, I like it when my partner says, you're pretty. Well, that sounds very benign, and isn't that a nice thing? But the problem is, what if my partner doesn't think I'm pretty? I mean, it's really possible that I'm not that pretty to my partner. I mean, that's just a reality. Or that I'm not good at something, or that they don't like my souffle. I mean, it's got to be fair game that my partner can be honest with me. And I need to have the resilience to bend like willow and not break like glass. But if you see I'm really traumatized, let's say in the merit domain, and my partner says, doesn't say I'm pretty, or I don't look good in this, or my souffle is burned, and I feel it as a traumatic injury, again, my go-to is to say, well, you see, this is you. You're too critical. You're not nice enough. You're not kind enough. This is really a me problem. And as I said before, I might have to go several rounds with my therapist before I can accept that this is a trigger in me.
Right. One of my common statements to clients is, I get they did all those things and that totally sucks for you, and they're not in here.
Yeah, right.
So since they're not here, would you be okay learning how to tolerate and or show up for yourself in a different way than you currently do?
Yes, absolutely.
And if so, let's do that, because they're not here. I can't control anything they're doing. And furthermore, we can't ever control anything anyone else ever does. And so our most primary ability would be in changing the way that we respond to people's reactions or statements or stimulus in the world. And that's like where we become the most empowered.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, can I share a little tip that sometimes I find augments that process? So it's an exercise that I call the convincer, and it's based on a very bad psychological phenomena that we really do not understand, and that is to say that we typically have different emotional reactions from one eye to the other. Not always, but sometimes. And so when a client says, well, of course I'm upset because my partner did X, I might invite them to do this exercise and to say, so cover an eye and think about how upset you are and give it a number 0 to 10. Yeah, it's an 8. My partner did this terrible thing to me. Now cover the other eye. Huh. That's more like a 2. What's the big deal? Now, it doesn't always go that smoothly. And every now and then, the eyes are the same. But 90% of the time or better, there's a differential. Well, it's very hard to say that my partner is a real jerk with this eye, but is like okay in that eye. Like, how does that happen? How did reality change that much? So I call it the convincer because it's this very visceral way to get in touch with the fact that, no, this is really my reaction to. Yes, my partner did in fact do X and not Y, but it's my reaction, my relationship to those behaviors is really at play.
That's awesome. So like an internal fact checker.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
I love
so
it.
that can somehow, leapfrog some of the tug of war about, is this cleaning up my side of the street, or I just got to find a different partner.
Right. That's great.
Cool.
Being that clients will be able to see, like with that convincer, oh, okay, so I can see more. It's my side of the street. What do clients need to do to heal?
So the theory of change, from my point, is a 3-legged stool of getting it, doing it, and feeling it differently. Now, the getting it part, that's kind of the thing that happens most quickly. That's because the front part of our brain, that's where we learned the capital of Brazil. We can learn stuff. We can have insight. In another language, it's called cognitive restructuring. It could be called psychoeducation. But I need to learn that there's, things that I'm doing, my partner's doing, that there's a model of fair play that I can learn and I can become acquainted with. So there were rules about conduct that I can learn, rules about exactly what we're talking about reactivity. Doing it differently means, instead of engaging in a fight, is there a way I can step back, listen more patiently, have more compassion and concern, or set good limits? However, the doing it hinges on the feeling it differently. So if my emotional brain isn't really resourced enough to do it differently, I will invariably fall back on old habits. So getting it, doing it, and feeling it differently is, to me, the essence of therapy. And the getting it part, that's the talk therapy that most of us are familiar with. The doing it, sometimes cognitive behavioral therapy emphasizes doing it, or relational therapies emphasize doing it. And the feeling it is really that bottom-up processing that we've been talking about, is changing how my nervous system responds to stimuli so that I actually have my frontal lobes available to me to be more skillful.
To have choices.
Yes.
Yeah. So tell us why you like to teach EMDR therapists about this concept.
Well, I love to teach about this concept. To me, the human condition is endlessly fascinating. I think that therapy is still a little more art than science. There's an art to being attuned.
I agree
There's an
with
art
that for sure.
Yeah. Timing, when to time or how to time my interventions, how to be with people. In Counseling 101, it's, lesson 1, build rapport. Now lesson 2, it's just overlooked. If it just comes naturally, it does not come naturally.
Right.
Our own attachment styles, our own lived history is going to influence how we engage with clients. So the good news is that there are rules. And there are rules, even though it's an art, there are guide rails that kind of keep me understanding, what makes people tick? What is the source of their suffering? What are some of the channels through which they can heal? How can their relationships become more optimized for safety, responsibility, trust building? And it's a beautiful enterprise that is, to me, a rich combination of theory. I have to understand the human condition. I need to know what the guide rails are for the client, for me, and technique, like the convincer I just showed you,
right.
and a whole number of techniques that I've
right.
developed over the years to really augment that feeling it differently stage.
That's awesome. Well, I am so very excited to have gotten to hear from you today. And I feel like I could talk with you all day long and have 1,000 questions. And I'm so grateful for your willingness to meet with me and share with our viewers a lot of these really important insights that, quite frankly, we probably should have learned in high school, and just, coursework that says, here's how people work and here's how it might be problematic if you don't understand. Wouldn't that have been nice? More so than algebra, at least for me, and probably most.
I know.
Yeah, ways we could have spent our time more wisely. But anyways, I just thank you again for coming and being with us today. And I look forward to more time with you in the future. And we'll probably have to do this again sometime. So thank you again. And
thank you, Kelly. And thanks for your generosity.
Yes, absolutely. So hopefully you enjoyed this episode, everybody. I really appreciate your tuning in. And please make sure that you share this or subscribe if you want to see more content like this. And of course, don't forget to lead with love. It'll never steer you wrong.